Raucous music shook the window shutters as people paraded past, shouting and singing in the memory of those they've lost to the other world. Every year, on El Dia de los Muertos, my small, dilapidated shop shook. It was on the ground floor of a building so old the thundering footsteps outside reverberated through ancient wooden floorboards. I watched the small flames of candles drift past the windows, flashes of shadowed faces, sugar skulls, and headdresses floating past like ghosts in the inky blackness. I awaited for my next customer, sketching shadows with charcoal idly on a roll of paper, my supplies laid out around me in expectation of guests. While I drew the curve of a forearm, the bell tingled and a figure shuffled in, shambling and unbalanced. I looked up, expectant, and saw the sagging face of a particularly decomposed corpse staring at me. Strings of lump hair hung about its face, a vague shape to its body that made me identify it as a her. "Hello, senora. Please sit," I said quietly, moving out of my seat and pulling out a cushioned chair. The woman stared at me, lips blue and eyes with a film of cataracts. Almost blind, but not yet. She dragged herself into the chair, bones clicking and bare feet making a sick, slick sound on the wooden floor that once would have disgusted me. I didn't even flinch. She was not my first customer. I sat and I waited. After several moments of being observed, a raspy voice spoke. "They say you," she began, voice gargled and almost indistinguishable. I could see the gashes on her throat in the low light, deep lacerations in her trachea. No blood, no gore. An old corpse, I surmised, but with another glance at her eyes, not too old. "You can make me look alive," she spat, and then gasped for air as she needed it. I looked at her solemnly and nodded. Only living customers were confronted with a smile. "I can," I said, and that was enough for her. She nodded, and I picked up my tools and began to work. After spending years on the sets of B-horror movies deconstructing faces, molding masks, and playing with color lighting and shadows to horrify, it was easy to reverse the process. Easy to reconstruct a face. Hours later, a fresh-faced woman shambled out of my shop. No payment from the dead. It was fine. Money was not why I did it. I stared out of the window and saw her body disappear into the night. Her face melted into the crowd, deceptively normal. I nodded in satisfaction. For 3 years I had been the makeup artist of the dead. I still remember my first customer, and the blood-curdling scream that came out of my mouth when I saw him. He had limped into my store with a torso covered in blood, lips blue and face swollen. He was a fresh corpse. Unemployed, working, and sleeping in the same dusty store, weak with exhaustion, I had collapsed into a heap. I remember thinking, this is the end. Death himself has come for me. Dazed, I had to struggle to come out of my petrified state, and black spots dancing before my eyes. The corpse had dropped clumsily to its knees and dragged himself towards me, eyes wide, blue lips moving in speech. It was begging. The desperation just snapped me out of my haze. "Please, I won't do anything. I just want to see her. I know she will be in the parade. I just want to see her." He was choking, crying, no tears left for his dead flesh to produce, but the anguish on his face sent a dagger into my heart. "Why? Why here?" I had asked, struggling, pressing my nose into the floorboards to not get up and run, far away from the fear in the face of the monstrosity in front of me. Frankenstein's monster stared back at me. I remember you for what I was alive. You can change your face," he said, and I'll never forget his face. The look of hope that almost made his swollen, bloated face look human, look alive. "Please," he said, and I had nodded. It took hours to change him, to revisit and practice seldom used abandoned talents. My hands shook like leaves in the wind. I made mistakes and then fixed them, and then made more. 4 hours later, it was done. He had looked at himself in the mirror, shocked, awed, thanked me and limped out the door. I did not ask him for payment. It didn't even occur to me. I never knew if he had seen her, or who her was to him. I never knew if the fruits of my labor had helped him find solace. The next year, there were more. I knew then that it worked. For the past 3 years, every year, on Dia de los Muertos, they shambled into my store, hoping to be alive for one more night. Some come to join the parade without being noticed. Others, like him, come to see their loved ones, to hear their voices, while they can still pass from someone who is alive. Some come because they are curious about the magician who brings them back to life just for a day. I am an artist, putting layers upon layers of pallid gray skin, breathing life into the lifeless. I had become a surgeon, teaching myself how to stitch loose bowels back into abdominal cavities, how to mold prosthetic eyes and insert them into the empty, cold eye sockets. Many I have to try to turn away with tears blurring my vision and heart in my throat because they are simply too decomposed and beyond repair. I sketch again, getting charcoal smudges on my fingers, and look up an hour later when the bell rings again. My next customer, for the first time in years, takes my breath away. I jump to my feet, skidded to a halt on the frail corpse entering my shop. It cannot be. No, it can't. He comes in, closer and closer, and I wonder why he doesn't know. Why? Oh, and then I see it. Deep gashes around 2 empty sockets. He is blind. I stand there and shake, trembling and rooted to the spot. "Hello," the man says, voice barely there, vocal cords so frayed it's almost an inaudible whisper. I am mute. Suddenly, I am transported back years to when I first started speaking. It's as if 2 years of speech therapy, 2 years of psychologists and clinics never happened. He shuffled closer, and even blind, he can sense my presence. He turns slightly, ears facing me. I wonder if he hears my shuddering breath. I wonder how decomposed his ears are, whether his hearing is sharp or barely there, a whisper of yesterday. Before he can leave, mumbling uncertainties, I dive forward and put my shaking hands on his shoulder. I can feel the bones beneath it. He looks hardened. "Thank you," he says shakily as I maneuver him into the chair. I open my mouth to speak, but only clicks. I feel a sob building up and I cannot speak. I cannot breathe through the headache pounding behind my eyes. But it's okay. He speaks for me. Am I too late? He speaks slowly and inaudibly. His voice is but a breath that rattles through his deflated lungs and brushes lightly past his frayed vocal cords. I cannot speak. I put all my concentration into hearing his whispers instead. I must be. But please, he begs. He looks so sorrowful. I stare into those empty, gruesome eye sockets and pretend I can remember what his eyes looked like. I just want to hear her. That's all. Can you fix me? I just want to stand by the window and hear her, he says, and finally falls silent. Tears roll down my cheeks and I begin with shaking hands. All I can hear is my heart beating loudly in my chest. My vision tunnels until all I see is his face. My hands work using muscle memory like I'm an automaton. Thoughts and memories batter at the walls of my head like hammers and daggers. Years. I hadn't seen him in years. My life had fallen apart. I lost my job, the house, and the same window to which he wanted to place his ear to. I never knew what happened to him. But now I did. I never found him, but he has found me. I don't know how long it takes. I can't hear the tick of the clock. I still cannot speak. When my hands fall away, he notices it is over. Do I look alive? He asks. And he does. He looks exactly like the last time I saw him, before he left my life and before he was taken from me and given to me in this stead, as an empty grave for the disappearance. Oh, Papa, I choked, voice finally free, and his face turns up to me in a shocked jolt. You look wonderful.
I'm in love with this guy. The only problem is, I think I'm imagining him. So let me begin by saying that I do have a reason to be crazy. Probably. I moved into my freshman college dorm this August. The first night, our whole floor had a meeting where the RA told us that we were living in the same building as a boy who committed suicide last spring. For our mental health, the RA didn't want to tell us which room he'd lived in. She was only telling us because the upperclassmen already knew, so she didn't want us to be alarmed. If anyone wants to talk about this, my door is always open, and the administration knows the situation might be frightening, so if you feel uncomfortable at all, you can request to switch dorms. I wasn't too uncomfortable, so I asked my roommate, Alyssa, how she felt. It was day 1, and I didn't know this girl at all. Turns out, she was fascinated with the RA's announcement. We ended up spending our first night of college stalking the internet for more information. It was morbid, in my opinion, but I didn't know anyone at school, and I wanted Alyssa to like me. So I sat next to her on the twin bed scrolling through articles. We learned that the boy's name was Peter Spilaski. He'd hung himself last spring after battling depression all year. He'd been a freshman, just like us. Does he have an Instagram? Alyssa asked me. You should check. I didn't want to, but I didn't want her to think I was scared. I typed his name into the search bar and an account appeared right away. @peter.spy was set to private, but the account wasn't disabled. Before I could stop her, Alyssa clicked, request to follow. Why'd you do that? I asked. Chill, she said. It's not like he's going to accept the request. I stayed up late that night, looking at the tiny circle of his profile picture. I would never admit to anyone, but he was kinda cute. He was laughing in the picture, wearing a plaid shirt with dark brown hair and wired frame glasses, like those boys who read John Green books, but won't admit it. Seeing his candid smile made my stomach turn, so I pushed it out of my mind and tried to sleep. I quickly forgot about Peter. Soon enough, I had my own drama. Starting college was hard, especially because Alyssa ended up being really weird. I didn't love hanging out with her or her friends, so I did most things on my own. I wasn't depressed, per se, but I was definitely counting the days to go home for Thanksgiving, meet up with my high school friends, and see my dog. That was until September 12th. It was Thursday, so I had class at 9 a.m. See a weird alert that @peter.spy had accepted my follow request. I didn't show Alyssa. I knew she'd obsessively combed through his pictures. Instead, I kept the account to myself. I admit, I scrolled to the end of his post. He had a fairly common boy Instagram, all pictures of basketball games, some shots of nature from camping trips, the occasional post, family picture. The most recent image was the full version of the profile pic, laughing in the plaid shirt, standing in the doorway of the dorm room. I recognized the doors right away. The caption had been deleted, but there was no mistaking the room number on the door. 410, my room. I try not to let it get to me, but I ended up calling my mom. I told her that my room was cursed. She was sympathetic, of course. How could she not be? But I could tell she thought I was overreacting. Luce, honey, you should try journaling. You've got to put all these thoughts somewhere if you're not talking to any friends. I'm not a writer, but I'd run out of options. That night, I gave it a shot. I didn't know how to start. So I started by addressing a letter. Dear Peter, I wrote. I'm sorry that you felt so alone here. If I'm being honest, I sort of know how you feel. The rest of the entry continued on the same thread, saying that maybe if we had both been living in the same dorm at the same time, we could have been friends. I talked about how I hated eating alone in the dining hall, mentioning that I wish I had oatmeal packets so I could just make breakfast in the dorm microwave. Embarrassed and a little creeped out by what I had written, I hid the journal in my sock drawer and went to bed. This is why you don't have any friends, I told myself. You write letters to dead people, you creep. By midday, though, the next day, I was so disgusted with the letter I'd written that I decided I was going to throw it away. When I got back from class, though, I completely forgot my initial motivation. There was a box of Quaker oatmeal packets on my bed. Alyssa, where did those come from? I asked, frozen in the doorway. They'd been there since I got back from class, she shrugged. Thought you went shopping. Alyssa was weird, yes, but I didn't want her to think I was crazy. I put the box in the drawer with the journal and slammed it shut, grabbed my laptop, and went to the library. I needed to distract myself with some work, so I figured I'd start on a paper that was due the next week. When I opened my computer, though, there was already a Microsoft Word document open. A single line of text, size 12, Calibri, everything default, and an untitled document. Sorry if I scared you. I didn't mean to freak you out. Just the opposite, in fact. Felt like you needed something familiar. Hope you like maple and brown sugar. That was always my favorite. P. It was all I could do to stop myself from screaming. Everything in my mind told me to delete the document, but instead I saved it as Haunted Oatmeal Doc. Maybe if I treated this as if it wasn't a huge deal, it would be less frightening, right? I couldn't get the note out of my mind, though. For the next week, I barely did anything besides add to a running list of people I knew that could be tricking me. I didn't think Alyssa had a reason to be messing with me, strange as she was. I didn't have any other friends who'd care enough to prank me, and my family was too far away. The only possible suspect in my mind was Peter, or more realistically, his ghost. I needed to find out for certain, though. A week after the initial letter, I wrote to Peter again. This time, I asked him if he'd given me the oatmeal. Before I could stop myself, I scribbled down that maple and brown sugar was my favorite flavor, too. I'd imagine his invisible body reading the entries over my shoulder. It should have freaked me out. But if I'm honest, it felt sort of nice to have someone care about me. Part of me was terrified that I was conducting a seance through college roll loose leaf. But another part of me was thrilled by the mystery. The answer came the next day. I was studying alone in my room, and my computer started playing Mirror Master by the Young Giant, my favorite album. I jumped off the bed and ran to my computer, where Spotify was pulled up to the new playlist called L plus P. The description: guess we have more in common than I thought. I did something stupid then. I added songs to the playlist. I went back to Peter's Instagram, found pictures of him at concerts in high school, and figured he'd like indie rock. I wondered if he'd been able to listen to new music since he died. He was missing out. Rex Orange County. New Tame Impala. I added it all. Ever since that moment, there have been more strange occurrences. I'll leave for class with my clothes fresh out of the dryer. I'll come back and they'll be in my drawer, tucked in my drawers, in a pathetic way that college boys fold clothes. I'll leave a problem set on my desk and come back to see the correct answer circled lightly in pencil. 2 days ago, I found a slip of paper in the front pocket of my jeans with a little note. Have a good day today. P. Adorned with the awkward, angular, smiley face that boys draw. I know I should be scared. Something about seeing his handwriting was endearing. Last night scared me, though. Enough to finally post this. Alyssa was out at some frat party, so I was doing some homework when I got a text from Mom. My dog, Rudy, had died. She didn't want for me to worry. He'd been sick for weeks, and when I come home for Thanksgiving, he wouldn't be there. I never get to see him again. After the isolation and homesickness of this year, I broke down. It was too much. I mean, God, the only thing getting me through each day was thinking about visiting home, and now I didn't even want to go back. For a long time, I just sobbed into my hands, knees tucked into my chest. I was so unbelievably upset. I didn't know how to process it. I just kept wishing someone was there to comfort me, close my eyes, and imagined that someone was holding me. I thought about the warmth of their arms over mine, the tightness of my body close with someone else's, the gentle blow of their breath in my hair. And I think I wanted it so badly that it started to feel real. When I allowed myself to confront my imagination, I realized that I was imagining Peter, his plaid sleeves, his soft hair, eyes still closed. I stopped crying for a moment. It was so quiet in my room. Everyone in the dorm having gone out on Friday night. That was when I heard the voice, so soft that I could have imagined it. "Lucy," it said. "What would you do if you knew I was right here?" "I don't know," I answered into the empty room. "I'd have to think about it." I know, right? Scary love, a true story. I seriously have the most fucked up story to tell you. It's in your best interest to hear every word, or you won't experience the same kind of horror I did when I first learned the tale. If you're a little older than me, or perhaps from New York, you may already know the story. It is the story of Linda Riss and Bert Puggish. I recently saw a documentary about the couple. In 1959, Bert Puggish was a successful 30-something-year-old lawyer in New York City. He was driving with a buddy in the Bronx one day when he saw a gorgeous woman sitting on a bench. He practically jumped out of the moving car to introduce himself to the beauty. She was 21-year-old Linda Riss, a kind-hearted girl from a poor family. Dazzled by his wealth and charm, Linda agreed to go out with Bert, much to the delight of her lower-middle-class family. Bert took her to the hottest clubs in New York City, showing her off to his jealous friends. Linda became absolutely smitten with the adoring older man. But one day, Linda found out that Bert was married, with a young daughter. She was heartbroken and disgusted. She broke off the relationship. Bert begged her to come back. Bert begged her to come back to him, and even showed her some divorce papers to prove he was leaving his wife. Linda was about to relent because she loved Bert, but then her family's lawyer discovered the divorce papers were fake. Bert had no intention of leaving his family for her, so Linda broke things off with Bert for good. Bert begged her to come back. She wouldn't relent. He started to become obsessed with her. He called her apartment dozens of times per day. He called her family and her friends. He stood across the street from her apartment every day. He followed her everywhere she went. He even sent her a threatening note, saying if I couldn't have her, nobody could. Linda was frightened and went to the police several times. But 1959 was a time before stalking laws were in place. The police shrugged off the incident and told Linda there was nothing she could do. Meanwhile, Linda tried desperately to move on with her life. She soon met a very handsome young man, and they became engaged. When Bert heard about the engagement, he was livid. Overwhelmed by jealousy and hatred, he hired a few men off the street and whispered a plan to them. One afternoon, the doorbell rang at Linda's apartment. Linda's mom answered it and called out to her daughter that it was a delivery man with a wedding package. When Linda came into the doorway, the fake delivery man threw acid in her face. The 23-year-old beauty was rushed to the hospital in an ambulance and was there for several days. But it was too late. She was blind and facially disfigured. The incident made national news. Bert was the most hated man in America that year. He received 14 years in prison. Despite the sympathies pouring in from millions of people, Linda's life was destroyed. Her fiancé broke off their engagement, not because Linda was no longer beautiful, but because he simply couldn't afford to take care of her now that she was visually handicapped. For the rest of her 20s, Linda dated various men, But the relationships all ended when she took off her sunglasses and revealed the horror underneath. She became painfully depressed and incredibly lonely. She spent the next decade held up in her tiny apartment in New York City, hating her life. And during those years, Bert never left her alone. He called her from jail every week, wrote her letters every day. He was still obsessed with her. She couldn't escape him. In 1974, Bert was released from jail, and he immediately contacted Linda, desperate to see her in person. Against her better judgment, Linda accepted. When she went to see Bert for dinner, he apologized for ruining her life and asked her to marry him. Linda accepted. Although she hated Bert for what he had done, she could tell he was truly sorry, and he still loved her. Plus, she was lonely and living in squalor. The finally divorced Bert was a wealthy meal ticket who could take care of her. She truly didn't believe she had anyone else. She was desperate. The two married that year. Their marriage shocked the entire nation. They were the subject of every talk show, news report, and magazine article in the country that year. Linda's family and friends were appalled, but Linda saw it differently. She felt she finally had a man who still thought she was beautiful, despite the physical damage he had caused. Plus, what better payback than to force him to see what he had done to her every single day for the rest of his life. Their marriage appeared to be oddly blissful until 1997, when a young woman accused Bert of threatening her life. Although Linda was hurt when she discovered her husband had been having an affair with this woman, she was a character witness during the trial, stating her husband wouldn't harm a fly. It worked, because he was found innocent. Bert and Linda are still married today. Happily. What do you think? I finally found the perfect man. There's just one thing. I have struggled with finding love for as long as I can remember. At 34 years old, I was decidedly ready to become a crazy cat lady and accept the fact that I would never find the one for me. I had jumped from relationship to relationship my entire 20s, desperate to find someone who makes me feel special. All I found were liars, cheaters, and creeps. Things got even harder when my mother passed away last year. My dad had never been in the picture, and I'm an only child, so I was losing the only family I had. She was diagnosed with cancer only a few months earlier. We never expected to lose her so fast. Losing my mom just made me feel even more alone than I already did. I had no support system to deal with her grief. I didn't know how I'd ever get through it. I just wanted to die as well. At least then, I'd have a chance to be with her again, if an afterlife truly existed. I bumped into Ryan a few months ago. I was at a bar, drinking alone, as I always did on Friday nights. I glanced across the room, and his eyes caught mine. He too was alone, but maybe it wouldn't be that way for too long. I was not good at flirting because it had been so long. I hadn't been on a real date in over 5 years. As I was arguing with myself over whether I should approach him, a deep voice brought me back to reality. "Hello," the voice said slowly and smoothly. I was ripped from the trance I was in and looked up to see the man standing in front of me. Up close, he was even more attractive than before. He had these dark blue eyes that reminded me of 2 deep lakes. His hair was dirty blonde and shone under the lights of the bar signs. He was incredibly perfect, and I couldn't believe he was talking to me. "Hi," I stuttered. He smiled slightly, the most amazing smile I could have ever seen. "Come here often?" I couldn't help but let out a chuckle. "That's what you're starting with?" He chuckled back, and it was like a million butterflies fluttered in my stomach. I never felt this way so soon after meeting someone. What was happening? It's been a while since I hit on someone, he said, smiling that amazing smile once more. He looked around the crowded bar for a moment. Do you want to get out of this shithole? I know a little diner down the road we can go to. Are you talking about Silver Dime Diner? Yeah, I chuckled slightly. You know that place closed last year. He rubbed his neck sheepishly. Shit, sorry. I just got back into town after a while away. No worries. We can go to Taco Marvin's instead. He chuckled. That sounds good. Can I get your name first? I blushed a deep shade of red. Oh, yeah, it's Shelby. He smiled again. Nice to meet you, Shelby. I'm Ryan. Ryan Morris. I smiled slightly and stood off my bar stool, grabbing my purse as I followed him outside. The restaurant was down the street a block, so I suggested we walk. I wasn't dumb enough to get in the car with some guy I just met. Ryan agreed, and we walked down to Taco Marvin's. And there we sat for hours, just talking about everything and anything. I felt like we could never run out of things to talk about. I enjoyed myself so much. We sat there and talked until nearly 4 a.m. when the sun was just starting to rise. Well, I really should be going, he said softly, standing up from our booth. I hadn't even realized how long it had been. I stood up as well, my knees cracking as I finally stretched my legs. Wow, I didn't realize how late it was. Can I see you again tomorrow night? I blushed again, looking down at my feet. Yeah, I'd like that. Ryan smiled. Great, what's your address? I'll pick you up. Can I text you? Oh, I don't have a phone. I was surprised at this. You don't have a phone? This is 2019. What's wrong with you? He chuckled again. I don't really have anyone I need to talk to. My smile faded slightly. Yeah, me either. Well, hopefully we do now. My smile quickly grew wider, and I nodded. Okay, let me write it down. I grabbed a napkin and wrote down my address. I handed it to him gently. I'll see you tomorrow then. Definitely, he said, taking the napkin and pushing it into his pocket. I smiled once more at him before I headed out the door and back towards the bar where my car was. I thought it was strange when I got to the parking lot and found my car was the only one there. How had Ryan gotten to the bar last night? And how would he get home? I turned to see if he was walking, but he was nowhere in sight. I figured he'd ordered an Uber or something at the restaurant and headed home. Our next day was just as amazing as the first, and so was the one after that, and the one after that. Before I knew it, Ryan and I had been dating for 3 months. I invited him to spend the night for the first time last month, but he objected. Let's not rush things, he said. I was content with that answer for now. However, he agreed to start staying the night about 2 weeks ago. He has stayed pretty much every night. Something is strange though. I've never heard anything about Ryan's job, yet he got up and left at 5 a.m. every morning. Perhaps that's where he was going. I decided to ask him. Where do you go in the mornings? I asked as he laid in bed beside me. He looked over at me. Oh, to run errands. At 5 a.m.? I laughed slightly. Yeah. It's the best time to do them, he said, trailing off. He looked away, and it seemed like he didn't want to talk about it anymore. As the days went on, I got more and more suspicious. He had no phone, somehow has transportation, though I never see his car, only came at night. The last straw came on Monday, when Ryan was getting ready to leave. Something fell from his pants pocket. A wedding band. I spent the whole day bawling my eyes out. When Ryan showed up to spend the night that day, I was ready to rip his head off. He came in the door and immediately knew something was wrong. "Have you been crying?" I threw the wedding band at him. "You're married?" He picked up his wedding band and sighed softly. "I was married." I crossed my arms. "And now?" Ryan looked at me sympathetically. "My wife passed away in a car accident a few years ago." "Great. Now I feel like a complete asshole." "I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have jumped to conclusions like that." I go to her grave each morning when I leave. I took a deep breath. "Oh." I looked back at him to search for any signs of anger, but there was none. "It's okay," he said with a smile. "You didn't know." I nodded, giving him a big hug, apologizing once again. I pulled away and looked up at him. "Do you think I could come with you to her grave?" He quickly shook his head. "No, I'm not ready for that." I accepted that answer. A few days later, we were sitting in a movie when he looked over at me. "You look a lot like your mom." I looked over. "What?" "I know your mom." "You look like her." "You mean you knew her?" I asked, a bit confused. "Yes, knew. I knew she passed away last year." I nodded as some tears trickled through my eyes, threatening to fall. "Yeah, I miss her." "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have brought it up," he said softly. "She misses you too." I nodded and leaned against him to watch the movie. My mom had never mentioned knowing anyone named Ryan. The next day, I received a text from an unknown number. What it said chilled me to the core. "There's something you should know about Ryan. Go to 234 Cemetery Road. His wife's name is Anna. Find her grave." I immediately drove to the cemetery and began looking around the seemingly endless amount of headstones. I finally found his wife's tombstone after an hour of searching. It looked how you would expect a headstone to look. Name, date, small inscription. What I didn't expect on it was Ryan's name right beside hers, along with a matching death date. My phone dinged again as I got a new message from the unknown number. "Ghosts do have phones, by the way. I hope he can make you happy. Love you, Shelby Cakes." Shelby Cakes. The nickname I'd been given by one person, and one person only. My mother.
"She's a keeper." That's what my dad always used to say, with a chuckle and a pat to my head. "She's a keeper," he'd say to a grocer or a clerk at a convenience store. People used to fawn over the cute pigtailed gal by her daddy's side. Always said her pleases and thank yous and never threw a tantrum and was just an absolute angel. Maybe this is why when I grew up, I always needed someone to give me a pat on the back. I'm not getting a compliment about how I look or how well I did at work. I'm gonna assume I did something wrong, or I had a piece of lettuce stuck in my teeth all day. This hasn't always worked for me. I'm a keeper, but I can also be a sucker. Like what's been happening with my boss. I love working as a secretary. It's a job that makes me feel really fulfilled. This makes me a bit of a stereotype though, with how I practically melted when Jonathan Price, my boss, complimented my blouse and my work ethic on the first day. I just reminded myself by looking at the silver ring on his left hand and the picture on his desk with his children that I shouldn't read too much into it. But Jonathan was perfect though, and over time I realized that I read him right. I never wanted to be the other woman. I just wanted to be loved. And being around Jonathan, working late nights just to have a moment to talk with him, having drinks after work, well, the inevitable happened. He kissed me after a few too many beers and we ended up going back to my place, and we slept together. I poured my heart out to him after that. How I'd liked him for so long and that I really felt a connection with him. He just smiled and brushed the hair from my eyes, telling me that I was the kind of girl you don't just let get away. Of course I believed him. Of course I swallowed the lump in my throat whenever I saw Marianne coming to visit her husband, my lover. Of course, I also ignored how I was the choice topic of office gossip, how the guy smirked and the other woman gave me the side eye and the cold shoulder. Of course, I listened when Jonathan said he was going to leave her soon. He just needed to make sure he didn't hurt her. And, of course, whenever he called to meet me at our typical meeting spot, a hotel in downtown, I was there with the bells on. Yeah, I know what you're thinking of me. I think it too. I'm not the brightest bulb in the package, but like I told you, I'm pretty easily manipulated. But I love Jonathan. I love his work ethic. I love how he takes care of his kids. Kids that he learned soon enough I couldn't have. You know, I wonder if that was part of my appeal to him, that he couldn't accidentally knock me up. He didn't love me. I was just an easy lay. A stereotype in every sense of the word. I only started wising up last week, when it occurred to me that Jonathan really wasn't slowing down his relationship with his wife, and certainly wasn't preparing for divorce proceedings. She was pregnant with their third child. I saw the pictures he posted on Facebook of their anniversary dinner. It hit me like a semi-truck when I read his status about enjoying 15 years together, and he couldn't wait to see what the next 15 would bring. I cried. I drank a lot of wine, and then I asked him to come to my apartment, that we needed to talk. Scary words for a guy, right? It took Jonathan a while to drag his ass over, which by then I was even more drunk. I don't drink often, and I certainly don't do it in excess, but can you blame me? I had just had that reality-shattering realization that I was just his pet to call on whenever he wanted to fuck and spew nonsense words at. Nonsense words that I fell for. Well, I did what I should have done about 6 months ago. I called him out on his bullshit. Said that he was never going to leave his wife, but he wasn't going to stop keeping me as his side piece. He tried to calm me down, but I wasn't going to back down to his pretty words this time. Either pick me or stay with your wife, else I'll call her and let her know the truth. My ultimatum. I'd spent the previous hour preparing. I felt so proud of it when I spat it out, expecting him to pick at least one of the options so this nonsense could end. Jonathan's face went white, then red, and then he picked a third option. He killed me. Jonathan picked up the empty wine bottle, which he muttered something about me being too much trouble, and then he brought it down right on top of my head. Caved my skull into the first smash, sending shards of glass all over my living room. I dropped like a rock, but I guess Jonathan was just too pissed off, cause then he used the remains of the bottle in his hand to keep stabbing me, again and again in the throat and in the neck. I was just about decapitated by the time he came to his senses. Of course, Jonathan freaked out, panicked, just washed the blood off his hands and wiped down the bottle before escaping the apartment. Just left me there, all alone, head nearly off my shoulders, my living room a bloody mess of wine and glass. Man, you should have seen the look on his face when I came into work the next day. I was at my desk by the time he came in. He looked like hell, understandably. I mean, he just killed a woman 2 days before. But he froze in his steps when he saw me sitting at my desk, tip-tapping away on my keyboard while scheduling another appointment later that week. I just waved to him real quick before going back to my work. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Jonathan bolt for his office and slam the door. Oh, that felt so good, watching him be the one to run in fear. Was he doubting his memory? Was he trying to convince himself that he just had a really bad dream? I clocked out after that, complaining about a cold. It'd been passed around the office, but I didn't go to my home. I went to Jonathan's home. A nice house in a nice part of town. I saw his wife working in the small garden out front, and after adjusting my scarf, I got out and walked up to the drive. She didn't see me until I was right behind her. Marianne was a pretty woman, even right now with a smudge of dirt across her face, no makeup, and her auburn hair held back by a yellow bandana. I cleared my throat and she nearly dropped the flower bulb she had in her hands. She glanced up, immediately recognizing me. "Oh, hi Nicole. Is something wrong?" She got up, brushing off her hand and smiling from ear to ear. Her pregnancy was just starting to show, her belly just ever so slightly growing. "Can we talk inside?" "Oh sure, sweetheart. The kids are at school, won't be back for a few more hours. Are you alright? Your voice sounds a bit raspy." "Yeah, I'll be fine." I waited until she was sitting down before I began the most difficult conversation of my life. And I got the most difficult part of it out of the way first. Your husband and I had been having an affair for almost a year. It was so sad just to see how Marianne just sighed, how she just nodded. I figured, with all the late nights at work and business trips that didn't take him out of town, I was just about to hire a private investigator to start checking in on him, so he saved me a chunk of change. Are you still sleeping with him? I shook my head. No. I figured that ended when he about took my head off with a wine bottle, I said. Her brow knitted in concern, so I decided to show her. I undid the scarf around my neck and showed her what I'd been hiding all morning at work. My neck is a sight right now. All purple and black and covered in decaying, cut-up flesh. I can't even imagine how the smell must be to someone not used to it. The putrefaction had spread down to my chest, which I showed her by unbuttoning my blouse. I had to start tearing my skin off to get any sort of relief. You can't imagine how horrid the itching gets when your flesh starts rotting off the bone when your skin is just the only thing holding it all in. I even removed my gloves to show the pus-filled sores and bubbles forming in my wrists and fingers. Marianne went white as a sheet as she took it all in. It looked so wrong, my face perfect as it always has been, but from the neck down I looked like roadkill. When the wave of stench finally hit her, she bolted for the bathroom. I could hear her violently throwing up from where I sat. I just about buttoned my shirt back up when she came back, teetering a bit, still looking pale but managing to remain steady. Wait, show me that again. I shrugged and unbuttoned my shirt again. I mean, if she wants a reason to barf again, she was welcome to it. But she didn't. She sat beside me, her expression of disgust melting away into one of wonder. Before Jonathan insisted I take care of the kids full time, I used to be a surgeon. You shouldn't be alive. You can't be alive. Are you a ghost? No, I shook my head. This just happens sometimes. I'm surprised it happened after your husband killed me. I thought I was a goner. But then I woke up with my body falling apart. Maybe I was due for a shedding. Maybe this just happens when I get hurt really bad. I don't know. Jonathan, she shuddered and shook her head. He's a bastard, but he wouldn't. He beat me with a wine bottle, Marion. I pulled the bloody shards out of my purse. And then when it broke, he stabbed me in the neck, all because I told him the affair was over. And now she was crying, tears rolling down her cheeks as her bottom lip wobbled with sobs. No, oh my God, I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I never thought. I never. I need your help. I rebuttoned up my blouse, but I left the scarf in my lap. It'll take me a few weeks to really come back together, but my daddy told me of a way to help me heal faster. His sister was like me. Fell apart, rotted like a corpse, and then looked just as pretty as ever in a few days. It took longer, though. Much longer. Before she started working as a mortician. It didn't take any real effort at all to convince her to help me. The kids are having a sleepover at Grandma's tonight. They're all really cute. There's a wine glass laced with sleeping medication ready for Jonathan when he gets home. And I'm waiting in the basement, passing the time by ripping off more rotten skin, wondering what human flesh will taste like. Marianne's already said I can stay here while I recover. She wants to study me. I'm something she's never seen before. She's fascinated. She says I'm a real keeper.